I could have blown that guy's head off.
Wait a minute. You liked it, didn't you?
Well, you said that...
Then you're as wrong as they are. This is no deer hunt. I want you to use that gun if you have to, but I want you to hate it. A big piece of civilization is gone, and your mother wants to save what's left. And so do I.
Don't you realize the implication of that? If everything is done for us, there'll be no incentive. No need for personal achievement. Even now we're losing ground. Machines do all the work for us. Why should we learn mathematics when the computers can find the solutions better and faster? We don't even control them anymore.
What the hell is all this secrecy? If I'm to believe you as a doctor, you can save just about every life in the world. So why does your committee deal only with the privileged, the select few? If you have the means to save human lives, you're bound by the Hippocratic Oath
to do it, to publish the fact and have 5 million people milling around outside our fences, starving, killing each other. We couldn't handle that, Senator. We couldn't even feed them. No, I'm afraid our society is based on the people's accepting the inevitability of death.
They were cheaply made B-movies, sci-fi schlock intended for drive-ins and grindhouses, distinguished by shoddy special effects, flashes of exploitation, and occasional subpar acting. But if you look past the goofy, outdated, low-budget surface, you'll find some of the most well-written, ingeniously conceived, and strangely prescient examples of speculative fiction committed to the screen. Not only do these films predict many of the technologically driven anxieties we're grappling with today, they also arrived long before many other films that are widely acknowledged as being prophetic themselves. The common denominator in these astonishing mid-century movies is screenwriter Jay Sims, who is something of an enigma. Not very much biographical information can be found on him on the internet. Not even a photo. What we do have is his brief filmography, which lasts just over a decade, beginning in 1959 with 2 Mystery Science Theater favorites, The Killer Shrews and The Giant Gila Monster, both made in Dallas and both highly entertaining. Then in 1962, or 1960, depending where you look, came The Creation of the Humanoids, a lo-fi exploration of high-tech themes, namely artificial intelligence and automation. It was also reportedly Andy Warhol's favorite film. Shortly thereafter arrived Panic in Year Zero, a post-apocalyptic road movie that examines ethical concerns as well as offering plenty of practical advice that may interest your present-day doomsday prepper. Finally, 1971 saw the release of The Resurrection of Zachary Wheeler, a conspiracy movie dropping just before the 70s wave of conspiracy movies and tackling issues like human cloning and organ harvesting, long before these subjects began capturing wider public attention. Most of Sims' work was actually for television, but it's the films that are pretty unusual for their time, chock full of provocative ideas, more in keeping with speculative sci-fi novels than with cheap B-movies. And I think they're deserving of much more recognition than they usually receive. It's difficult to discuss these films without spoilers, so if you're adverse to spoilers, I recommend that you seek out the movies and watch them first. Let's take a look at The Creation of the Humanoids. The story is set several generations after nuclear war has wiped out most life on Earth. In order to help rebuild civilization, robots have developed to a point where they're almost human. While most of society have embraced the robots, sometimes literally, others regard them with fear and contempt, addressing them as clickers.
All clickers look alike to me.
Certain of us prefer not to be called clickers.
Thus introducing the sort of bigotry and segregation that will be commonplace in many later films.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
There's an anti-robot hate group that calls itself the Order of Flesh and Blood. And one of its most militant members, a dude named Craigus,
The Craigus,
has a slight problem. His sister Esme is in a relationship with a robot named Pax.
I don't see how you could do it.
Pax and I are in rapport. We're in harmony. He understands me perfectly. He instinctively knows what I want. I just think of something and it's done, because he thinks of it at the same time. There are no arguments. He's dedicated to keeping me happy. And I am happy.
You love that machine?
I love Pax.
This scene succinctly addresses many questions that would be further explored many years later in films like Her and Ex Machina. What is love and human connection? Is it something that can be legitimately experienced between human and artificial entity? Or is that completely delusional? The Village Voice article that revealed the creation of humanoids as Warhol's favorite movie also held a very negative opinion of Esme, viewing her relationship with Pax as nothing more than narcissism. A Rod Serling-penned episode of The Twilight Zone held a similar view of human-robot romance. The Lonely told the story of a solitary convict who is given an android for company. He falls in love with it, a situation that, while understandable, is considered delusional.
Now you're going to have to leave that robot behind.
She's not a robot. She's a woman. No!
That's not the case in Creation of the Humanoids, which is much more sympathetic.
I love you, Esme.
For one thing, Esme's human ex-husband was an abuser. Pax is programmed to be kind, empathetic, and answerable to Esme's every need. He seems to be a sensible alternative. An increasing number of people throughout the world, mostly young people, are in complete agreement. Digisexuality, or objectophilia, depending on what you think of the phenomenon, lies at the heart of the film's overarching concerns. Questions about human identity in light of the promise of machine consciousness. Bear in mind, this is several years before the 1968 publication of Philip K. Dick's landmark novel To Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, which in turn was the source material for 1982's Blade Runner. Craigus discovers that he is actually a robot, the latest, most advanced model, something like the replicants in Blade Runner.
She doesn't know.
She's beginning to suspect, I think.
Suspect? How can it not know what it is?
I don't know what you're talking. I'm me.
The idea as to what constitutes personhood is the same in both films.
We draw off everything that makes a man peculiar to himself. His learning, his memory.
Memories. You're talking about memories.
There has been plenty of 21st century entertainment addressing philosophy of mind, fueled by the rise of consciousness studies and the exponential growth of technology. It's fascinating to watch these ideas play out in a movie that looks like a mid-century industrial film about household appliances. And the acting...
You could have fired bombs and guns and thrown spears.
Playing Esme is Frances McCann, who is known more as an opera singer than as an actor, which may account for her theatricality. I can't help but wonder if that's her on the soundtrack. A female soprano standing in for a theremin and paving the way for the Star Trek theme. Playing one of the clickers, by the way, is Dudley Manlove, fresh from the Ed Wood masterpiece, Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Because all you of Earth are idiots.
Your terminology is crude, but your conclusion is correct.
Despite its cheap, campy stiffness, Humanoids manages to be thoroughly engaging, considering the quantity of ideas that Sims packs into it. In terms of action, it's less like Forbidden Planet and more like My Dinner with Andre. By the end of the film, which I won't spoil because it's just too good, the humanoids still lack one faculty, thus preventing them from being entirely human: the ability to procreate.
Self-procreating.
It's a pretty sloppy way of doing things, but it fulfills a certain psychological need.
Existential dread over the fate of the species has cropped up in many subsequent films, reflecting fears that many have today. While Creation of the Humanoids takes the anxiety over impending obsolescence and turns it on its head, the next J. Sims script to find its way to the drive-in would bring a more immediate fear of annihilation, up close and personal.
Like me?
Panic in Year Zero follows the Baldwin family as they head out of the city to go camping, and in doing so, inadvertently escape the nuclear destruction of Los Angeles. It then becomes a struggle for survival. as the film seesaws between being an exploitation movie and a helpful nuts and bolts tutorial on how to survive the apocalypse.
We need a big bag of dried beans. Up, Rick? No eggs. Too hard to store. Get some canned fruit.
Interspersed throughout the action is a running debate as to what constitutes ethical behavior in desperate times.
Survival is going to have to be on an individual basis. At the moment, we have to have food. A way to protect it and a way to get more when it's gone.
What do you want to do? Write off the rest of the world? Getting your son to hold a gun on a man.
Drop it, Ann!
We're on our own, Ma. No rules, no regulations, and no laws.
Don't write off the law. The law will come back.
Isn't there anybody we can trust?
No.
Released at the height of the Cold War, Panic in Year Zero is just one of several post-apocalyptic offerings from that era. These movies usually feature a small group of survivors, wondering if they're the only ones left, except in cases where they have to fight off hordes of mutants.
Morgan, come out!
But other than that minor inconvenience, they have the entirety of civilization's leftovers pretty much all to themselves. It's a big empty mall. In Panic in Year Zero, this imbalance of supply and demand is completely inverted. Gas stations are the first to understand this and respond to market forces correctly by price gouging.
It says 34 cents right there. 34 cents a gallon. It comes to $10.
I didn't have time to change it yet. It's $3 a gallon now.
Why?
Because people been paying it. Of course, now it don't have to be money.
Harry!
Supplies dwindle as people start hoarding. Brute force makes up for the absence of law and order. Forget about radiation sickness and mutants. The biggest immediate threat is other people.
And you keep your gun handy. Our country is still full of thieving, murdering patriots.
Other films of the period are more like warnings about how mankind must learn to live in peace or risk extinction. Political message films concerned with the future of the human race. Panic in Year Zero is comparatively apolitical. There's no hand-wringing over why this happened or how this could have been avoided, which reminds me of the narration that opens the creation of the humanoids.
They had talked and argued for years, trying, they said, to find a way to prevent it. But they failed. No one can be sure who started it, and really that is unimportant.
In fact, the issue of nuclear war is barely a blip in the screenplay, and could easily be replaced by any other kind of catastrophe. This may account for why the film, as old as it is, still resonates with contemporary doomsday preppers, some of whom can be found on YouTube, critiquing the Baldwin strategy and level of preparedness.
Let's see, what else do I have on this list? Plenty of candy bars, a big bag of dried beans, canned fruit, condensed milk, shortening, matches, a few boxes of candles, case of soap. There's no mention of toilet paper.
He does a very smart thing by dividing up their supplies and burying them, caching them in different locations so that if someone does stumble on their spot and robs them or whatever, they won't lose all of their supplies. Now, it's very smart. Also, you don't see that a lot in these type of movies.
While most apocalyptic movies feature outlandish scenarios, highly stylized design, and cool vehicles, Panic in Year Zero is closer in spirit to films like The Road, based on the Cormac McCarthy novel, and Michael Haneke's Time of the Wolf. No-nonsense depictions of survival in a collapsed world and the attendant war within. After Panic in Year Zero, it would be nearly a decade before the release of another J. Sims scripted movie. Throughout the 60s, Sims would do plenty of television work, mostly westerns. The few episodes of his TV work that I've seen so far are intriguing philosophical explorations of death.
I always figured that I'd live forever. But the trouble with this dying business, it makes you feel like a plum-turned fool. I always hoped if when I did die, I'd be out of town at the time. Somebody'd have to come and tell me about it later.
I guess it's something everybody has to do for himself.
Westerns are better for that sort of thing than sitcoms. Unless you include Sims' 1970 episode of The Courtship of Eddie's Father, titled Eddie's Will, where Eddie overhears how Mrs. Livingston once had a son about his age who had died in a car accident. Eddie responds by writing his last will and testament, which is what you'd expect any sensible kid to do. The following year, the next J. Sims scripted movie would open with a car accident. The Resurrection of Zachary Wheeler stars Leslie Nielsen and Angie Dickinson, and was one of the first movies shot on videotape and transferred to film, which is probably one of several factors contributing to its cheap and dirty look.
My God, that's Senator Wheeler.
Senator Zachary Wheeler faces certain death after the accident, but he's quickly spirited away to a secret hospital, and the entire incident is covered up. Leslie Nielsen is the reporter intent on finding out what happened.
Less than an hour ago, that man was bleeding to death in an ambulance. I was with him. Jake, you saw him too.
Well, actually, I didn't.
What?
But he's constantly shut down,
You're fired.
misled,
No such person arrived.
and threatened. Bear in mind, this is before Watergate, the church committee hearings, and the spate of conspiracy movies that would characterize the 1970s. Over at the secret hospital, Senator Wheeler is tended to by Dr. Angie Dickinson, who sweetly explains how his body has been reconstructed with parts harvested from his clone. This is 7 years before the Michael Crichton film Coma introduced the concept of black market organ harvesting, and also happened to feature another protagonist named Wheeler.
What did you say your name was?
Dr. Wheeler. Susan Wheeler.
Senator Wheeler is horrified to learn that his life has been saved by a clandestine life extension project, which promises practical immortality to deserving candidates who are selected by a secret committee of business leaders and policy strategists. This leads to a series of debates regarding the ethics of bioengineering and cryptocracy.
Who was it who said that there's a time to live and a time to die?
Someone who had no choice. Someone who lived a long time ago.
Yes, but I wasn't given a choice. It was made for me by people that I'm not sure that I approve of.
The clones in Zachary Wheeler are properly referred to as somas, which is a direct reference to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. But genetically engineered cloning wouldn't really capture the popular imagination until The Boys from Brazil. In 1979, Parts, the Clonus horror, would reintroduce the idea of clones being produced specifically for organ harvesting, an idea which has turned into its own little subgenre.
We are modelled on trash. Junkies, prostitutes, winos, tramps.
In Zachary Wheeler, the somas are incapable of this kind of self-reflection and existential angst.
A soma is simply a synthetic person, just a body. It contains all the organs present in a human being, but aside from having life, it's not human. It has no mind, no intellect, no soul, if you will.
They aren't much more than laboratory-grown chicken meat, which is fine. Sims had already addressed these issues of identity and consciousness in Creation of the Humanoids, in which the humanoids are essentially clones, recently deceased individuals with their minds uploaded into new artificial bodies.
But I still have my own face. But my hands, how can I feel so complete?
At the film's end, the sci-fi speculation merges with the detective story as our intrepid reporter discovers the hospital in New Mexico.
My God.
Both the politician and the journalist vow to blow the lid off the conspiracy.
You go ahead and you get your story out. And people will listen and they will believe you because I'm going to back you every step of the way.
But the good doctor is unfazed.
Cho En-lai has just had his second coronary. He'll be here in about 12 hours.
Good. I knew we'd get to him sooner or later.
Many commentators complain about this ending, finding it a goofy, unsatisfying throwaway, which I think may be the point, not only to this film, but to J. Sims' entire oeuvre. A bit of historical background first. At this point, the US and China had no diplomatic relations since 1949. Even the Soviets had always been on speaking terms with the US. It wouldn't be until 1972, with Richard Nixon's surprise visit to China, that ties were established. But in 1971, the mere suggestion that Chinese President Zhou Enlai would be visiting New Mexico for a medical procedure would elicit astonished reactions like this. This ambiguous ending suggests that the entire operation is just too big to be taken down by a couple of whistleblowers. Resistance is not just futile, it's met with a big shrug and a joke so slight that a cheesy double take is necessary. What's curious about these movies is that although they depict ideas that are alarming, they aren't alarmist. The closing titles of both Creation of the Humanoids and Panic in Year Zero are nearly identical in their optimism. J. Sims' final credit is for a John Ford film, a documentary about General Chesty Puller, America's most decorated Marine. Sims is responsible for John Wayne's narration, and his descriptions of conditions during the Korean War are vividly written.
Through this campaign, the cold was bitter. It was like breathing razor blades. Canteens and spare socks had to be kept inside the uniforms, next to the skin. Only dry rations. Gunners used hair oil to keep their weapons in operation.
I wonder if J. Sims was a military man. Or perhaps he was the same J. Sims that worked as a radio and TV announcer.
High Finance. J. Sims speaking. This is NBC, the National Broadcasting Company.
Or maybe J. Sims is a pseudonym. Whatever the case, these movies are a fascinating watch for anyone willing to forgive or enjoy their flaws, while at the same time pondering their dark underlying implications. As for anyone who has seen these movies and didn't like them,
the humans aren't ready for it yet.